What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I shot a video on this particular radio, but I shot a video, I don't know, a few weeks, maybe a month back about the things I didn't like about it. Now I want to shoot a video about the things that I do like about it. And it took a while for a reason. So I wanted to make sure I put this radio through its paces and really had a feel for what it was about before I made this video. And I had one thing in specific that I wanted to do with it, and that was field day. Today is Monday, June 30th. So this past weekend was field day. And I used this radio all day Saturday on field day. I ran with two clubs. On Saturday, I ran with W3 LTR. And on Sunday, I ran with W2OW. And I wanted to use this radio during field day to kind of see how it worked in contest conditions. So we'll talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about some of the different aspects as far as what I thought about the receiver, and I'm going to talk about some other receiver stuff in a minute. So you can see we're currently on, I don't know if you probably can't see that because it's probably washed out because of the sun. You might be able to see it a little bit. I'm on 14.069240 on 20 meters, and I'm on 146.865, which is a local repeater. I've got my new nameless paddle. Thanks, Aaron. This thing is awesome. This one's like matte black and black cherry. It looks pretty cool. So it works nice. But one of the cool things you can see, I'm on two receivers at once, right? I'm on HF and I'm on VHF. And on VHF, if you come around to the back of the radio, so one of the complaints about this radio is the VHF and HF antenna ports are in the wrong place. And I'm going to agree with that. But you can see the way I've got this set up right now. This is how I've been using it in the field. I'll either have a roll-up J-pole on it, or I will have this little antenna. It's like, or this little tripod. It's like a little camera tripod, and I've got the Elecraft like KX1 or AX1, AX2 adapter for a tripod on here. You can see I've got a signal stick on it, and a counterpoise on that ground lug, and a little piece of coax, and that works awesome. The other thing I'll do with it is I will put like a 2-meter half wave on there with no counterpoise. That works really, really well. I'll show you how well this works. So let me swing you back around here. You probably won't be able to see the SWR graph, SWR meter. You might be able to. It's a little washed out. Like I said, we're kind of in direct sun right now. Let me switch just to that receiver. All right. This is Kilo 2 Echo Juliet Tango testing the signal stick on the Yaesu FTX-1. See if anybody comes back to me.
2EJT, KD2UDR, you're coming in loud and clear, no waterfall, perfect sound.
KD2UDR, K2EJT. Hey, thanks, Jason. I really appreciate you coming back to me, man. Thanks for the signal report in 7.3. KD2UDR, K2EJT, clear and listening. So I don't know if you can see that or not, but that was a 1-to-1 SWR. Works awesome. So you just need a counterpoise. If you're running obviously, if you're running a quarter wave antenna, like a signal stick is, you got to have the other half of the antenna, right? This is designed to be on an HT, where you're the other half of the antenna, right? So if you're using this on a radio that you're not holding on to, you've got to have a counterpoise unless you're running a half wave antenna like that MFJ that I had. Speaking of antennas, I've got on HF, I have my spark plug 40 meter end-fed half wave up in the tree here in sort of an inverted V, just playing around here in the backyard. But so let's talk a little bit about my experience. Sorry, this keeps moving. I'm trying to get everything in frame. Let me talk a little bit about my experiences with this radio, what I think about it, and some of the positive aspects of this radio that I think people don't really think about when they look at this radio. They only see the negatives, and it's got a lot of positives. So, like I said, I used it in field day. I used it all day Saturday. I ran all day Saturday, hundreds of QSOs, full 100 watts running the amp, which is down in the Apache case right there. And like I said, I was running with W3 LTR. Me and my buddy Mike used it, and it worked flawlessly. Reception was good. Adjacent signal rejection was good. I didn't have any problem pulling signals out. It didn't get hot. So that's one of people's concerns, is they're afraid this radio is going to get hot. I pounded on this thing all day, and it was 85 degrees out, and I ran all day long 100 watts with this thing running as fast as I could, and it got warm, just warm to the touch. My 891 gets hotter than this does, if I'm being honest with you. So heat is not an issue. Okay, now Sunday I ran with W2OW. So W3LTR we ran down in Pennsylvania. W2OW I ran at Copernic Observatory here in Vestal. And I ran my FTDX-10 most of the time. But I also brought this radio with me, and the club has some FT710s. So I actually ran the FTDX-10, the 710, and this radio all side by side by side. I would swap the antenna from radio to radio to radio just to kind of get a feel for how those different radios handled things. And I will say that it was clear the FTDX-10 did a little better job with both noise floor and adjacent signal rejection, which makes sense because it's a hybrid receiver. It's got a crystal filter in it, right? So it's going to. I'm going to say that the FT710 probably had a little bit lower noise floor than the FTX-1 did. That's subjective. I'm not basing that on any numbers. And I'm going to talk about numbers in a second. But yeah, it worked flawlessly all field day. I had zero issues with it. Now let me touch on receiver numbers for a minute. You know, everybody looks at the Sherwood report, Rob Sherwood's numbers, and I did too. And I'm going to fully admit that I am not a radio nerd. I just use them. I'm not an engineer. And so sometimes I will say things that are incorrect, or maybe I don't understand things completely, and I'm not alone in that aspect. There are a lot of people out there who refer to things and numbers and specs without really fully understanding them. And it's funny because Rob actually emailed me yesterday or the day before and said, hey, you know, if you could maybe take a deeper dive into the numbers and try to understand what they really mean, because that ranking is just one aspect of how well those radios perform. And I'm guilty of that, right? I'm looking at just that number and, oh, it's number whatever on the list compared to whatever else. Well, that doesn't take into account all the rest of the qualities the radio has. So he asked me if I would, he's got a thing on there that explains each column and what they mean. So I'm going to do a deep dive into trying to understand what all those different numbers really mean and how they really affect how the radio performs. I'm sure, Rob, if you watch this, I'm going to have a lot of questions for you, so expect some emails from me. Like I said, this is not my forte, so I'm going to need some help understanding all this stuff. But I will say that I thought it performed pretty well in the grand scheme of things. Probably as good as my 891 would, which we know has got a pretty good front end on it. So it did well. Now let's talk about some of the things that I really like about this radio. First things first is the audio, and I know everybody harps on that, but audio is kind of a subjective thing, but there's some things I like particularly about this radio. I find it real punchy. You can dial the equalizer in so you can get, especially if you're trying to do like DX where you're trying to accentuate the highs, I can get that, especially if I use these front-facing speakers, I can get that real nice so that things really stand out. It's not real muddy. You can run just the front-firing speakers, or if you've got the amp on, you can run the front-firing speakers and the speaker on the amp, or just the speaker on the amp, or an external speaker. You've got a lot of options. But I personally find the audio on this radio to be very good. I like the fact that you can select between different speakers and things like that. I love the dual receive thing. All right, some people are like, it doesn't really matter. It's not full duplex. It's not good for satellites. I know that, but for me, I'll set this thing up at a park and I will start working on, let's say, 40 meter CW, and I'll have the other receiver on 14652, and I'll call CQ on 14652 and then start working CW. And if somebody comes back to me on 2 meters, I can just pick up the mic and answer them. I can run both simultaneously, and I've done it. So I really like that feature. I like that aspect of this radio. Has two receivers, 2 antenna ports on the receiver. There's 3 on the amp, which, for me, that's handy. Now, yes, you could do the same thing with an HT. I like having all in one, especially if I'm like, let's say I put a J-pole on this thing and throw it up in a tree. I've only got to have one radio there, and I can get that antenna way up in the air. I can do that with an HT too, but it's a little more hassle. The display is very bright, very legible. I personally like Yaesu's layout of their displays better than ICOM. That's a personal preference thing. Some people are going to argue that one, and that's okay. Again, that's personal preference. I just personally like how Yaesu lays their displays out better. I like the form factor of this radio. One of the things that I didn't like about the 705 was it had that weird protrusion on the back where the battery goes in, and you've got the antenna port sticking out the side and some other weirdness. I like the form factor of this one a little better. I like the button layout better. But again, that's subjective. That's just me. You might disagree, and that's totally fine. I just personally like this form factor a lot when you're talking about this style radio. Now, if you're trying to build like a man pack or something, this radio is not the radio for you, right? You're going to want like an old school Yaesu, like a 817, 818, 857, that kind of thing. You know, that's going to be much more suited for that kind of use. But for a radio of this type, I personally like this form factor. I like that I can just throw the battery on it and it sits at that angle right there. I don't need a stand or anything to make the radio sit at a particular angle. I love the fact that I have the amp that plugs in, right? I can just stick the amp on, I'm at 100. I can just throw the amp on it and I got 100 watts or whatever I want to run, 20 watts, 50 watts, whatever I want to run, right? Or I can pop it off and use just the field unit and I'm good to go in the field. Am I going to do soda with this? Normally, no. I probably will do a couple soda activations with this. All right, Jim, let's turn you down there. There we go. Okay. So like I said, it's probably not the optimal setup for that kind of thing, but I'm definitely going to do some soda with it just to prove that you can. People do it with the 705. There's no reason I can't do it with this. Would it be the first radio I would grab? No. If I wanted an all-mode radio, I'd probably take a KX2. Or if I was just going to do CW and I'm going to run QRP, why not run like a Mountaintop or a CFT1 or a KX1 or something smaller and lighter? But for this style radio, I like it a lot. It's got USB-C. That, now yes, you can, other radios you can swap over the port to USB-C, but this is native USB-C. The battery is USB-C, the radio is USB-C, none of that micro USB nonsense or, you know, whatever that goofy one on the back of like my FTX-10 is, right? It's sort of that universal USB Type-C, which I appreciate. It's got a familiar layout for me. So I'm a Yaesu guy. I run an FTX-10 in my shack. I like, my favorite HT is an FT5. I personally like how the Yaesu lays things out. I know there are people that absolutely hate it, and that's totally fine, right? If everybody used like the same layout, there'd only be one radio. But for me, I'm so familiar with how Yaesu does things that I like the layout of how they do things. Some people don't like their menu structures. I don't find it too bad on this radio, although I will say the menu is more cumbersome in this radio than it is a DX10 or a 710. You got to long press that function knob to get into the menus, and then there's multiple screens of menus. As where the DX10 or the 710, it's just a single press and it's one page. My hope is that they will, in a future firmware update, and there is a firmware update I have to do to this. I haven't done it yet because I wanted to get through field day first before I did the firmware update just in case something went sideways. But I'm hoping in maybe a future firmware update, they'll change that from a long press to a short press on that function knob. That would make a lot of difference. It can be powered multiple ways. So I can power it from the battery I've got attached to it. I can power it from an external battery. I can power this thing. I've done it USB PD. If you watch the short in my truck, I've got it hooked up to a trigger cable on the port in my truck, and I can run it that way. So I can power it multiple ways. I've seen videos where people say, oh, you can't charge it via solar. Also not true. I've got a short on my channel where you can see me do it. So yes, you can do all those things. And it's funny because people say those things. Well, if I can do it with any other radio, why couldn't I do it with this one? Right? And people are like, oh, it's got to be a USB PD. It does. But if you charge the battery from the jack on the back of the radio, who cares, right? The only time you should be charging that battery from the USB port is when the battery is detached from the radio. In which case, yes, it does need to be a at least 30 watt USB-C PD charger. But all of my power banks do that. I've got all sorts of wall warts that'll do that, so that's a non-issue. And I can just plug a 12 volt source into the back on the jack on the back of the radio and charge it too. So it's really a non-issue for me. It's really good on CW. I'm a CW guy, and this radio is awesome on CW. There's not much else to say on that. But if you're a CW operator, a lot of CW operators like Yaesu radios, and there are a lot of reasons for it. But this radio is fantastic on CW. The build quality is great. It's solid. It feels tough. It doesn't feel cheap in any way. Much like the 705, people are afraid it's going to be fragile, and it's turned out not to be. I think this radio is the same way. People are like, oh, you're going to damage it. I've thrown this thing in my backpack, not had an issue. I stick this thing in, I've got a big switch case. In fact, you've probably seen it in other videos where I use it with other rigs, but this radio plus the field battery, plus the mic, plus a small key, plus the power cables and a few other things fit beautifully in that sort of rigid switch case. It works great. Toss it in my backpack, you got the whole shack ready to go. The only thing I don't put in there is the antenna. It's not quite big enough to fit the antenna in there. I might look for a bigger one that I can put the antenna in too, but that's not really a big deal. Now let me talk about Yaesu's customer service for a minute because this blew me away. So we've had some issues with this radio in the early days. There were bugs and things like that, and I would submit bug reports, and I would within a day get an email back from Yaesu saying, hey, we've got your report, so on and so forth. Well, in 2 weekends, I'm going to be going down to Wellsboro, Pennsylvania to work comms at a rally. And I had to program, they have 7 sets of repeater and simplex frequencies that you use on different stages as the cars are coming by. And I went to program those into this radio, and the names would not program. And I finally realized that if I put in a name and then backed all the way out, went back in, scrolled all the way over to the right and deleted everything and put the name back in, it would take. And I'm like, this is messed up. So I submitted a bug report, and the next day my phone rings, and it's Roger Kerr from Yaesu on the phone, not an email. He called me, and he said, hey, let me walk you through this. Let's see if we can figure out what's going on. And he was able to. Finally, what I ended up doing, and it worked, was he's like, just save everything to the SD card, reset the radio, throw the SD card back, and load everything to the SD card. And I did it, and it worked fine. And all my settings were there. Everything was. That's one of the nice things is if you got to do a firmware update, you don't have to wipe it unless you're updating the bootloader also. But if you do have to do a hard reset on this radio, you back everything up to the SD card, and then you load it from the SD card, and it's all there. You don't lose anything. So he called me personally and walked me through what to do, and I shot him an email, said, hey, it worked, thank you so much. I can't say enough good things about how good Yaesu's customer service has been on this radio. And the bugs that I've had are minor. And yes, people are going to say, oh, it's half-baked, it shouldn't have been. I get it. Yes, there were bugs. Those are some of the things you kind of have to deal with the new radio. Should they be there? No. Are they fixing them? Yes. Have they been really good about listening to the people and their bug reports? Absolutely. So if I can give props to Yaesu in one place, it's absolutely their customer service department. And Roger, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And people are going to say, oh, he just called you because of your YouTube channel. If you really think people from Yaesu USA watch my YouTube channel, I've got beachfront property in Arizona to sell you. Like, those guys don't watch my YouTube channel. I'm just a customer. All right. So, yeah, customer service, awesome. Like I said, all in all, I'm really enjoying this radio so far. I think it was the right choice for me over the 705 just because of how I use a radio and the things that I like in a radio. I'm not knocking the 705. The 705 is a fantastic radio. I had mine for, I don't know, a year and a half, and I used it quite a bit, and I liked it, but there were some things about it that I just didn't love. So far, I like this radio better. Have there been frustrations? Of course. It's a brand new radio, and there's bugs. But they've got most of them worked out now. From what I understand, this new firmware update takes care of a lot of the APRS stuff and things like that people were having issues with. So, all in all, I'm going to say that the positives for me outweigh the negatives on this radio. All right. It works for me the way I use a radio, and it's got all the features that I want in a radio. Now, is it going to be perfect for you? Well, if you want Wi-Fi, no, right? If you want, if you want the ability to Wi-Fi remote into your radio and operate it from an iPad, this is not the radio for you. If you want nice, colorful menus and pictures and things like that, probably not for you. If you're somebody like me who's used to how Yaesu does things, likes their receivers, likes how they operate on CW, likes the layout, then this might be the radio for you. Is it expensive? Sure it is. And people balk at that price, but let me put it in perspective this way. It's $150 more than the 705 is. When the 705 came out, it was the same price as this. With the amp, it's only $400 more. That's not a whole lot, okay? Think about how much an Elecraft KH-1 costs, an Edgewood package. And that's a CW-only radio with 3D printed parts and a horrible side tone and a mushy key. Now, I'm not knocking the KH-1. It is a cool little rig, but man, it's expensive for what you get, okay? This is the same way. It's expensive for what you get, but for me, at the end of the day, I think it's worth it. Just like for most people when they buy a KH-1, for them, for the way they're gonna use that radio, that huge cost is 100% worth it, because what other radio can they walk around and do, pedestrian mobile CW in such a small form factor? Could you do it with a KX2? Yeah. Could you do it with like a Xiegu 6100, 6200? Yeah, you could, but it's a whole lot bigger, a whole lot heavier, and a whole lot clunkier. So at the end of the day, folks, if you have any other questions or comments about the radio or anything I talked about, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'm going to say the same thing I always do. Please keep the comments civil. If you disagree with me, that's fine. And if you want to articulate your opinion as why, that's also fine. But if you're just a snarky jerk about it, I'm not going to respond. And if I do, it's probably going to be like, okay, cool. Like, at the end of the day, it's a radio. Like if you don't like it, I don't care. That's cool. Move on with your life. Don't buy one, right? I like it. Most of the people that I know that have them like them. Yesterday when I had it at field day, people who hadn't seen one yet and were a little skeptical about it, all were like, holy cow, this is cooler than I thought it was gonna be. I also got a lot of, wow, this is bigger than I thought it was gonna be. But like I said, folks, at the end of the day, you buy the radio that works for you. For me, this radio works for me. It does all the things I want it to do. It doesn't have a bunch of superfluous stuff that I'm not going to use. Like the 705 had stuff I was never going to use. And that's okay. Other people do, right? So like I said, that's I've had this radio a little over a month. And that's my current thought on this radio. There are a few flaws, but all in all, the good outweighs the bad. And for how I use a radio, this radio's been awesome. Like I said, it did awesome on field day. All the bugs that I had have now been fixed. So for me, yeah, this is a great portable radio. So at any rate, folks, thank you so much for watching. I'm sure you'll see this radio on the channel a lot more. I'll use it in a lot of different activations and things like that. You're also going to see this key a lot more. I haven't taken it out and done an activation with it yet, but I really like how it feels so far. So at any rate, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Like I said, if you got any questions, leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, as always, until next time, there's my thumb, 7-3.